Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am Dave Brown, and this is the new Populist. Well, tonight we had a very interesting segment from Tucker Carlson. He contacted last week several Republicans who might declare a run for president, some who already have, and he asked them 6 very important questions about this Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so I want to go through all these responses because there's some very interesting responses. Some of them are pretty good, but there's some small stuff you can pick at, and I will. And really, I want to break down where exactly these candidates stand at and give them a grade. An A, good stuff, or an F if they're absolutely terrible. And where I want to start, of course, is Donald Trump, because he is the front runner, and in all likelihood, good chance he will be the Republican nominee. So 6 questions, Donald Trump. Let's go through his answers. The first question: is opposing Russia a vital American national strategic interest? And he says, no, but it is for Europe, but not for the United States. That is why Europe should be paying far more than we are, or equal. And my response to that is, yes, it is more important for Europe. And here's Trump, he always talks about paying the fair share with NATO. So he's kind of echoing that again, where Europe's not paying enough. But he is right. It is more important for Europe, not for the United States. If you're Poland and Finland, yes, Russia is a bigger deal than for here. Russia can't attack the United States. What do you do? Invade Alaska? Not happening. So for Europe, it definitely is. The second question: what specifically is our objective in Ukraine, and how will we know when we've achieved it? And Trump says, our objective in Ukraine is to help and secure Europe. But Europe isn't helping itself. They are relying on the United States to largely do it for them. This is very unfair to us, especially since Europe takes advantage of us on trade and other things. And now again, Trump is about the trade and the fairness and blah, blah, blah. And one thing I think he's kind of glossing over is the fact that we have a lot of control over Europe. They dance like they're our puppets. We just bombed the Nord Stream pipeline and made Germany look like a fool. So while, yes, Europe takes advantage, they also do our dirty work. Right now, Europe is paying a lot more for this war than the United States because their energy costs are skyrocketing. Here in America, we have tons of energy, tons of gas. We're actually selling more gas to Europe because of the Nord Stream pipeline not operating. So yes, I think Trump here again is going down the path of Europe not doing enough, but in reality, they do our bidding, and these sanctions on Russia are hurting them a lot more than the United States. Okay, third question. What is the limit of funding and material you would be willing to send to the government of Ukraine? And Trump says, that would strongly depend on my meeting with President Putin and Russia. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine if I were president, not even a small chance. Would have never happened if I were president, but it has. I would have to see what the direction in which Russia is headed. I want them to stop, and they will, depending on the one that delivers that message. But with everything said, Europe must pay. The United States has spent much more than Europe, and that is not fair, just, or equitable. If I were president, that horrible war would end in 24 hours or less. It can be done, and it must be done now. Now, Trump is going back to that Europe's not doing enough, and if I were in charge, we would stop this war in 24 hours. Yes, this is bluster from Trump. This is what Trump does. He goes to that next level and pats himself on the back. Would Russia have attacked attacked Ukraine if Trump was president? Here's the thing. He's approaching it from the standpoint of Putin and Russia being scared of him because he's Trump. I think the opposite. I think they wouldn't have attacked Ukraine because they saw in Trump somebody they could at least negotiate with. Well, this Trump called himself all the time a great negotiator. So Trump likes to be the tough guy. But in reality, I think Putin actually looked at Trump as somebody he could talk to and try to work things out with, not that he was scared of Trump. So I don't quite agree with Trump there that Putin would have not invaded because he was scared. Next question. Should the United States support regime change in Russia? And Trump says, no, we should support regime change in the United States. That's far more important. The Biden administration are the ones who got us into this mess. And he's right. We do need regime change in the United States the legal way through the voting booth, hopefully in 2024. And as far as the Biden administration getting us into this mess, Jake Sullivan, Victoria Nuland, people who are prominent in his administration, they were there back in 2014 when Biden was vice president. So these people, Biden, his administration are largely to blame for what's happening in Ukraine because they started these operations in Ukraine, these color revolutions, undermining that government back in 2013 with Victoria Nuland, and Jake Sullivan was at the time, Vice President Biden's security advisor. So these same players are there right now, and they were there in the beginning. So in that sense, yes, the Biden administration did get us into this mess. And the next question. Given that Russia's economy and currency are stronger than before the war, do you believe that U.S. sanctions have been effective? And Trump says, no, they have not been effective, just the opposite. They drove Russia, China, and Iran into an unthinkable situation. 100% right. China is now closer to Russia. Iran is closer to Russia. And China is negotiating deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So absolutely 100%. These sanctions backfired on the West. They have not hurt. They simply hastened the pace in which the global South and China and the bigger powers there are consolidating, coming together to oppose the United States and the West. And the last question, do you believe that the United States faces the risk of nuclear war with Russia? And Trump says, it depends on who the president of the United States is at the moment. With Biden as president, absolutely yes. He says and does all the wrong things at the wrong time. 100% true. Biden does all the wrong things at the wrong time. He's a moron. It does depend on who the president of the United States is. Absolutely. If it's somebody else like Trump, I think Trump would do much better in not having things escalate this far. And Biden, and this is the funny thing about Biden, you look at his career, 50 years in government, he has been wrong on so many big issues over and over and over again. And you think to yourself, how the heck did he become president when has a history of absolute failure? But that's how our system works. When you fail and do terrible stuff in government, you just get promoted. Good for you. And now we all have to pay for it because we have somebody with dementia in the White House, and he's leading us down this path that could potentially lead to World War III. Now, the next person, Ron DeSantis. Now, one of my criticisms of Ron DeSantis was that he echoed something that John McCain said, where John McCain said that Russia was a gas station masquerading as a country. And that is really condescending and belittling people in Russia who have a long history and culture. And to talk about a country like a gas station, when McCain said that, I thought it was ridiculous. And when DeSantis said something similar, I thought it was equally ridiculous. And his foreign policy was something that I was worried about. Now, his comments on these questions is much better with some small issues, and I'll go through them right now. So the first question is opposing Russia in Ukraine a vital American strategic interest? And DeSantis says, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, securing our borders, addressing the crisis of readiness within our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia, is not one of them. The Biden administration's virtual blank check funding of this conflict for as long as it takes, without any defined objectives or accountability, distracts from our country's most pressing challenges. Now, one thing I don't like here is that he's deflecting to China. Now, it's very convenient. This conflict's a year old, so we can kind of see where things are going, which is Ukraine's being destroyed, and Russia, in all likelihood, will be victorious. So it's easy now to come in and go, well, yeah, this is a bad idea. We should be paying attention to China. So you ignore or you move off from one disaster, the Russia-Ukraine war, and you start to go after China now, which will be another disaster. So I'm glad he's saying that, no, this is we have other issues to worry about. But then he just sort of pivots over to China, which I'm not a huge fan of. And this issue with Taiwan, again, they're doing the same thing. Taiwan, China, Ukraine, Russia, same thing. And he's sort of dodging that a little bit and deflecting over to China. The second question, what specifically is our objective in Ukraine, and how will we know when we achieved it? And DeSantis says, without question, peace should be the objective. The U.S. should not provide assistance that could require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. F-16s and long-range missiles should therefore be off the table. These moves would risk explicitly drawing the United States into the conflict and drawing us closer to a hot war between the world's two largest nuclear powers. That risk is unacceptable. Well, of course, peace should be the objective. Doesn't really tell us how we're going to achieve that peace. He just says we need it. And he says we shouldn't give them offensive weapons. So it's okay answer, but he's not telling us how to get the peace. And he's basically implying that we should still give them weapons, just not offensive weapons. So on that answer. Now, that second answer was the answer for both question 2 and 3, which is what's our goal in Ukraine and how will we know it's achieved, and the issue regarding material and money being sent to Ukraine. So the fourth question is, should the United States support regime change? And DeSantis says, a policy of regime change in Russia, no doubt popular among the DC foreign policy interventionists, would greatly increase the stakes of the conflict, making the use of nuclear weapons more likely. Such a policy would neither stop the death and destruction of the war, nor produce a pro-American Madisonian constitutionalist in the Kremlin. History indicates that Putin's successor in this hypothetical would likely be even more ruthless. The cost to achieve such a dubious outcome could be astronomical. True. The former president of Russia, Medvedev, he's actually, if you go on Twitter, he's kind of a clown actually. But he talks a lot of garbage. He's trolling, and he might actually be worse than Putin. Putin is actually very, very measured. He doesn't say things off the cuff. He's not whimsical. He's very precise, very measured, very controlled. And as DeSantis points out, the next guy could be even worse. So DeSantis is right here. Our goal should not be to have regime change. The fifth question, given that Russia's economy and currency are stronger than before, do you believe the U.S. sanctions have been effective? And DeSantis says, the Biden administration's policies have driven Russia into a de facto alliance with China. Because China has not and will not abide by the embargo, Russia has increased its foreign revenues while China benefits from cheaper fuel. Coupled with his intentional depletion of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and support for the left's Green New Deal, Biden has further empowered Russia's energy-dominated economy and Putin's war machine at American expense. All good points. That has happened. Russia is doing fine. They're getting their relationship with China has improved. They're giving more oil to Russia. I'm sorry, not Russia, to India. So DeSantis here, good call. And yes, the New Deal stuff is not helping. The Green New Deal, we don't need that garbage. And the last question is, do you believe the United States faces the risk of nuclear war with Russia? And he says, we cannot prioritize intervention in an escalating foreign war over the defense of our own homeland, especially as tens of thousands of Americans are dying every year from narcotics smuggled across our open border, and our weapons arsenal, critical for our own security, are rapidly being depleted. This is kind of an evasion here. He doesn't really answer the question. So on that answer here, not a good grade. It's kind of a, deflecting elsewhere. And that's the last question from DeSantis. And next is Mike Pence. Now, when Mike Pence joined Trump back in 2016, we all kind of liked him. The Pence plane has no brakes, and he was stoic, and we thought he was a good counterbalance to Trump. But ever since they went their separate ways, Trump or Pence's true colors have come out, and boy, is he horrible. He is neocon number one, and good Lord, this guy should be nowhere near the White House as president. He is a rubber stamp on all the neocon foreign policies. But don't take my word for it. Let's go through his answers. Some of them are just insane. And goodness gracious, I can't stand this guy anymore. First question, is opposing Russia in Ukraine a vital American strategic interest? And he says, when the United States supports Ukraine in their fight against Putin, we follow the Reagan doctrine, and we support those who fight our enemies on their shores, so we will not have to fight them ourselves. There is no room for Putin apologists in the Republican Party. This is not America's war, but if Putin is not stopped and the sovereign nation of Ukraine is not restored, quickly, he will continue to move toward our NATO allies, and America would then be called upon to send their own. Let me just stop there because there's so much to unpack. First thing he says is, we support those who fight our enemies on their shores, so we will not have to fight them ourselves. What is he saying? He's saying, we're going to send Ukrainians out there to die, so we don't have to fight them. They're the cannon fodder. They're expendable. Here's some rifles. Here's some weapons. Go get massacred by the Russians, so we don't have to. I mean, for a guy who's such a hardcore religious person, man, that is cold. Sending Ukraine against the Russians to get slaughtered, so we don't got to do it. And then he says, of course, this thing, there's no room for Putin apologists in the Republican Party. So if you question this war, if you're worried about nuclear war, if you're worried about how this war is going to end, you're a Putin apologist. People who do that, you can't take seriously. That's a way of saying, I don't want to actually defend my positions and debate this. I want to slander people and just cut them down if they happen to disagree with me. And this is the same thing that happened in previous wars, with Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam. They immediately attack you as simping for these other world leaders when you're really just concerned about your own country and where this all might lead. So I hate when people say that. And then he says, this is not America's war, but if Putin is not stopped and the sovereign nation of Ukraine is not restored quickly, he will move on to our NATO allies. No, he won't. Putin does not want to trigger Article 5, which would the neocons they would love it if Putin attacked Poland, for example, who's a NATO member, or Romania. It would be great for the neocons because they will get the war they want. And Putin does not want that. He does not want that escalation. So this idea that he's going to move on to NATO is absolutely brain dead. And secondly, we keep hearing about how the Russian army is so garbage. They're not well trained. They don't got supplies, and they're incompetent. So on one hand, they're incompetent. On the other hand, they're going to attack NATO. Doesn't make any sense. No, it does not. But this is the neocon nonsense you hear. It's complete garbage. And when you go through it, it's so easy to break down and just tear apart. And it's one paragraph here, I'm already just like, here's 8 million reasons why what Pence has said is stupid. But let's keep on going, because it's really telling as far as these neocons and their foreign policy and how they just loathe Russia. And he says, Vladimir Putin has revealed his true nature, a dictator, consumed conquest, and willing to spend thousands of lives for his commitment to reestablish the greater Russian Empire. Anyone who thinks Putin will stop Ukraine's borders is not owning up to the reality of who Putin is. We need to be clear-eyed about the Russian threat, that Georgia, the Crimea, and Ukraine are merely at the top of Putin's list. They are not the only countries he's aiming for, and by supporting Ukraine, we have told China we will support Taiwan should they follow Russia in an attempt to invade. First of all, you go to Crimea, you ask the Crimeans, they say, we're Russian, leave us alone. And Crimea has been part of Russia for hundreds of years. Sevastopol is their warm water naval base, which is critical for Russian national security. They will never give that back. They will nuke Ukraine before they give back Crimea. So that's not going to happen. Also, now he's also calling out China. You know, we're sending a message to China. Should they invade Taiwan, we'll be there too to give Taiwan weapons so the Chinese can massacre them and not actually send our own people. So after one failure, Ukraine, he's pivoting to the other future failure, which will be Taiwan, should they be stupid enough to do what Ukraine is doing and try to fight China, which will just be a disaster. So that's the first question already, and we have a million dumb things. Let's go to question number 2. What specifically is our objective in Ukraine, and how will we know when we've achieved it? Victory for Ukraine, where Ukraine's sovereignty and peace are restored as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the Biden administration slow-walked aid to Ukraine. Every response has been too slow, from providing intelligence to Ukraine to hammering Russia with sanctions to providing military equipment and fighter jets to Ukraine. Now, one of the strategies of the neocons on the right, Republicans, is that they have to go even further than Biden. So they have to attack Biden from the right. So all the things that Biden has given to Ukraine and done for Ukraine, it wasn't enough. He should have done more. And so that is the strategy of Pence, attack him from the right, say that they just needed some more equipment and fighter jets, and that would have been problem solved. Ukraine would win. Of course, it's nonsense. Russia has a military that's on their country on a war footing. They're outproducing NATO and the United States. I mean, like crazy with ammo and with their artillery shells and rocket artillery. So what we're going to give them is only going to prolong the inevitable, and that is that Ukraine will eventually lose. And he says here too, Ukraine's victory should be unmistakable, undeniable defeat for Russia and its allies. Wishful thinking. Not going to happen. What is the limit of funding and material you'll be willing to send to the government of Ukraine? And Pence says, as a fiscal conservative, because that's what's important, he's a fiscal conservative, I do not believe in sending blank checks and want oversight of government spending at home and abroad, but withholding or reducing support will have consequences. If Putin is not stopped now and he moves into NATO-controlled territory, the cost will be far greater. So once again, his whole thing is, well, he's going to invade NATO, so we got to stop him now. And again, he will not touch NATO. The neocons would love if Putin attacked a NATO country, and it will not happen. And Putin is not stupid, and he knows that he will drag Russia into a war that will just tear the country apart if he's now in a fight against NATO. So this idea that Putin wants to do that, again, is a fantasy created by the neoconservatives. Let's move on. Should the United States support regime change in Russia? And Pence says, that is a better question for the thousands of Russian citizens jailed for protesting the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As many as 200,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded in Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That question should be asked to those families grieving their loss. Ask if they support a regime change. Now, what he's doing here, by the way, is the number 200,000 Russian casualties. That's nonsense. It's the other way around. Ukraine has those casualties. That's what Ukraine is suffering. But part of the way that neocons keep up the support for the war is by claiming that Russia is the one suffering all the losses and Ukraine is doing fine, despite the fact that Ukraine has gone through 1 million mobilizations. Every day, people are being snatched off the street in Ukraine and forced to go fight. Russia had its partial mobilization back in September, and there has been relative calm there ever since. They're not having these losses that Pence is talking about. These losses are happening to Ukraine. And like Pence said, we're having the Ukrainians fight, so we don't have to fight. Where's Pence's concern for the 200,000 dead Ukrainians? It might be 250. And by the time this war is over, it could be 400, 500,000 dead Ukrainians. It's terrible. The next question, given that Russia's economy and currency are stronger than before the war, do you believe that U.S. sanctions have been effective? And he says the Trump-Pence administration established a devastating sanctions program, and well, he wrote this wrong here, and was the toughest U.S. administration on Russia since the Cold War. Sanctions against Russia could have had even more painful consequences if the Biden administration moved quicker with new sanctions and Western Europe had heeded U.S. warnings to look elsewhere for energy resources. Russia's economy and currency are not stronger than before the war. The Russian economy is in free fall. The Russian ruble is still afloat because of the extremely costly measures Russia has taken to keep their currency at pre-war levels in the face of sanctions. Russia is currently being propped up by China, and if China withdraws their support, Putin could run out of money by as soon as 2024. Russia is not in a strong economic position. The war is costing Russia their economy, their military prowess, and their position on the world stage, and is costing lives. Now, Pence here is in fantasy land. Their economy is fine. And one thing he says here, which I thought was fantastic, he says that if China withdraws their support, then Russia is going to crash, right? Now, let's suppose for a second that China is propping up the Russian economy. What did he just say earlier? Just earlier, he threatened China. If China goes after Taiwan, we're going to go after China. Our eyes are on China. Given that we're threatening China, what incentive does China have to not prop up Russia? No. Of course they're going to prop up Russia. Of course they're not going to withdraw their support of Russia. So even if it were true that the Russian economy was being propped up by the Chinese, China is not going to withdraw that support. So his whole point here of pointing that out is meaningless. Their economy's fine, and they're making deals elsewhere. And the global South and Southeast Asia and Africa, they're all still working with Russia because Russia has something that everybody needs: energy. This whole thing about green energy and solar panels sounds good. But when you get down to it, you want a prospering economy, you need gas and you need oil. And Russia has that in spades, which is why they will continue to do fine, even with sanctions from the West. And the last question, do you believe that the United States faces the risk of nuclear war with Russia? And Pence says Putin is still the small and bullying leader of Russia. His talk of nuclear war is a bullying tactic that he has used at the start of the invasion. But Putin should know the United States will not be bullied. This administration has not led with strength on the world stage, but America is still a nation that believes peace comes through strength. Small and bullying leader. All they can do is talk down to Putin and treat him like he's just a complete maniac. Russia has signaled for years that Ukraine was a red line. 2008, WikiLeaks memo. The former ambassador to Russia from the United States, William Burns, who was the current CIA director, said, Ukraine is a red line for Russia. If we mess around there, we're going to find out. He said that 15 years ago. We messed around there. Now we're finding out. So this is this whole thing about nuclear weapons. If Russia feels threatened, that there's some existential threat to them that's going to crush their country and completely destroy them, yes, they could use nukes. And if that happens, we all die. It's global annihilation. So we need a more serious answer than that here on just calling Putin names. That's not helping us as far as this question to the about whether or not nuclear war is a threat to us. It absolutely is a small threat, but it's still, again, nuclear war is nothing to just dismiss. Even a small threat is is huge when it comes to nuclear weapons.